This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to talk to you about AI assistants, but first, Adam is going to look into the science behind the Sandworms in Dune.
That's right. Listeners, have you seen this movie called Dune? It's great. It's directed by David Lynch. It stars Sting and Patrick Stewart. It's fantastic.
Boo.
Okay, there are actually 2 new Dune movies, and they're also pretty cool. They're based on a series of novels, which was the inspiration for the most popular science fiction movie franchise of all time. One of the fun things about these books and movies are the sandworms. So these are massive worms that crawl around in the desert, and as depicted in the films and described in the books, they move really, really fast. In sand and on sand, sort of.
Yeah, the planet Arrakis is kind of a very sandy planet.
It is. It is a desert planet full of dunes. That's why they call it that.
What?
So is this at all plausible? Does this make any sense? Sand isn't water, but sometimes in fiction, we treat it a bit like water. I remember seeing this episode of the Will Friedle Thundercats cartoon where they had these boats floating on sand as if it was water, and I thought it was total nonsense. It was very silly, but...
You can surf down sand. I've seen the videos.
Okay.
I think it maybe is similar to water that way.
At an incline?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're just stuck in the sand. I imagine the coefficient of friction is higher on sand than the surface of water.
If you heat up water, you get steam, and if you heat up sand, you get glass. It's the same thing.
Yes. They're both transparent when heated enough. So I've been working through the books. I'm currently on the 5th book, Heretics of Dune, and there's a lot of worm stuff in some of these books. So there may be some minor worm-related spoilers for the Dune books, but I'm not looking to give you major spoilers about the plot of these books or movies. A couple months ago, the world's most lovable buzzkill and frequently canceled TRC guest, Neil deGrasse Tyson, was on Stephen Colbert, and he talked about these quote-unquote worms. So the movie takes place in sand dunes. There are hungry worms which plow through the sand. And you'll find that if you make a sound that repeats using something they call a thumper in the books and the movie, that it will make the worms come. So this was the first kind of issue that Neil deGrasse Tyson and Colbert talked about and that Neil deGrasse Tyson had a concern with.
A repetitive sound, right? A rhythmic sound.
Yeah.
Draws the worms to that location.
Yeah. So that's why they walk within a regular pattern, so then the worms don't think it's potential prey and stuff like that. But Neil deGrasse Tyson had a concern. He says you can't thump sand because sand is a great acoustic insulator, so it wouldn't carry sound, right? So we're thinking of maybe the equivalent in water where the sound would actually carry fairly well in the medium. We don't really hear things that well in water because we're adapted to listen above in air.
To be fair, I don't hear things well in sand, so that's a good point.
That is true. Whenever I'm buried in sand,
yes, exactly,
I can't hear a thing. So that's a concern, obviously, with some science in the movie. You could say maybe the worms hear really well, but still, like that, it just doesn't really make a ton of sense that it would travel these great distances that they would hear it. They would be more able to hear it if their heads were popped out of the sand or whatever their ears would be on. We don't actually see their ears anywhere. And then they heard people making noise just out in the air. Neil deGrasse Tyson also takes issue with the way the worms move fast through the sand. So we'll get into this a bit later, but basically he compares it to like a snake's movement isn't the same as the sandworm movement, right? The sandworm goes in a straight line. It doesn't curl or wiggle or anything like that. So Stephen Colbert presents a few options for why it might be going straight and moving very fast. He says on the belly it might have little things, so, some sort of small legs, some sort of small limbs or something like that. Or he says it could be a reverse peristaltic thing where there's like a wave-like action, how some worms move. And then Neil jokes that maybe they're pooping really fast, right? So this is, an earthworm will eat the sand as it burrows, and it doesn't really look like the worms in Dune do that, but that's a possibility.
Yeah, they do move almost like a wave, right?
Yeah, that might be a plausible mechanism, but there are concerns with that, and I'll get into the specific science of that in a bit. He also has issues with the ornithopters, so that there's basically these little, like helicopter equivalent type of things, whereas other ships are shown to move sort of with almost some sort of anti-gravity type of technology. So how does that make sense? And then Colbert suggests maybe an ornithopter can't have the same power source. And Colbert is a big fan of Dune and the Dune books, evidently, so he's defending it a lot. So it's a fun conversation. It's in the show notes if you want to check that out. So there wasn't much else Dune related in the conversation, but I did find a few articles that looked specifically at the issue of the science of Dune and the science of the sandworms themselves. So let's dig into that.
Let's dive into that sand.
Okay, so let's get this out of the way. Arrakis is not Earth, right? So the worms in Dune, they're not earthworms. They're not just earthworms that evolved to be big. They didn't come from Earth and then get dropped on Arrakis and then evolve. It's another planet. Their biology might not resemble ours at all. It might be something very different. Would an alien on this planet even be made of cells? Would they use respiration using mitochondria or anything like that? We don't know. But they can't cheat physics, right? Unless they're doing something weird like they eat uranium out of the sand and they have a nuclear power plant in their bellies, or they create antimatter or something weird like that. They probably, they consume fuel and they use that to move.
Well, to your main point about Arrakis not being Earth, it's not clear that the people in Dune are human people.
They are.
They are human people.
In the books, it's a little more clear, but yeah, there's references to the OC Bible, which is related to the Bible from Earth.
I'd forgotten
it's the future, but it's the distant future. It's something like 10,000.
Oh, right. Touche. I should remember this. Yes. Well, Star Wars people are not human, correct?
No, Star Wars is a long time ago in a galaxy far,
but they do look very similar to those Dune people.
They do refer to the people in Star Wars as being human. Not often, but they do use the word.
Suspicious.
So
very suspicious.
It's a little odd. So the worm's movement not making sense doesn't need to be because it's not a worm from Earth. Like, it still has to follow physics, right? If it was a good way to move, an organism on Earth would have evolved that, right? We have a lot of organisms on Earth which evolve different adaptations to our challenges, sort of independently in parallel. Because if there's a good solution, evolution will usually find it.
Well, it will sometimes find it. But you're right. Convergence is a thing.
One would expect a sandworm to move around on the top of the earth or on the top of the sand in a way that is somewhat similar to something like a snake or a worm's movement. Those themselves are different one from another, but that, you would expect it to move like that and not just kind of going in a straight line.
Sand is so much denser than air.
Oh, it's a lot denser than air, and it's a lot denser than water as well, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a book called The Science of Dune, which includes a chapter, The Biology of the Sandworm, by Sibylle Hechtel. And it seems Frank Herbert didn't actually describe how the worms move in the Dune books. So when we were saying, they did that in the movie, that's, the interpretation of the movie on how it would do it. So he said that the worms swam like fish under the surface. So sand in Dune is, for the worms' purposes, treated a bit like water. So if earthworms are the closest analog to sandworms, then the earthworm is made of rings, right? Each of which is surrounded by a muscle. Each controls a pocket of fluid. The different parts bulge and elongate, which makes a slow wave-like ripple along the worm's body, which propulses it forward. Could you scale this up is kind of the question, because the sandworms are huge. Mm-hmm. Well, probably not, but maybe that's still the basic idea that was conceived of when these books were written. In the film, the sandworms are shown to have hard skin, so these water balloon-style segments don't really fit with that particular portrayal. So even though we can't scale things up, that's often what movies do, right? So years ago, I did a segment on the science of Godzilla, and a lot of the physics of it fall apart at larger sizes, can't hold its own weight, it can't regulate its heat, it can't control its limbs in real time because of the distance from the brain. But this isn't something they consider as filmmakers. It's just like, it's like a dinosaur, only bigger, and it's cool, so they do that in the movie. So I think that's the similar idea in Dune. They're just like worms, but big, and that's just how you have to think about it, and they didn't think about the specifics.
Yeah, that's probably the concise conclusion.
Yeah. So are there any other movements which might explain how a giant sandworm could move? Well, a snake undulates while staying flat against the ground. Neither these or other similar shaped animals swim below the desert's surface, right? So on Earth, that's not really something we see a lot. But it's not really like the Dune sandworms are that much more like a fish. Snakes actually have a lot of different ways of moving. They kind of coil and uncoil and things like that. And that's not at all how the sandworms seem to move in the movies. And it wouldn't really work for the books either, because they're not usually on top of the sand. They're usually kind of in the sand.
Right. I was even thinking like an eel, underwater eel, right?
Yep.
But the worms don't move like that either.
No, not really. But maybe in the books they could sort of undulate more or have micro undulations, right, to make the moves. So the sandworms, like I said, they appear to move in a straight line. And some snakes do this, such as pythons, right? So Henry Astley of the University of Akron teaches a course on biology that inspires monsters in fiction. I would love to take this course. So he weighs in on the idea of sandworm motion. He said that snakes like pythons have muscles connecting their ribs directly to their skin. The skin on their undersides pushes against the ground to move them forward, causing what is referred to as rectilinear locomotion. This causes movement in a straight line, which is less likely to topple Paul or his Fremen buddies over while they're basically surfing on the worms. Even if they've got these hooks into the worm skin, it would be rough. And in the movies, we don't really see them getting jostled side to side. They seem to be going mostly forward. Pythons, unlike earthworms, don't deform their body shape when they're moving forward, and that's more consistent with the hard bodies of the sandworms that are depicted in Dune. No deformation also means less of a bumpy ride. Like imagine an earthworm kind of expanding and contracting. Paul would fall off.
It would be so hard to stay on, yeah.
So that's all well and good for the above ground movement, even though maybe the speeds don't make a ton of sense. But it really doesn't explain what's happening beneath the sand, right? Sandworms may be pythons in the streets, but they're amphisbaenians in the sheets, as the expression goes.
Which means what?
So they burrow and move quickly underground, poking their mouths out in something which, by no coincidence, resembles the Sarlacc pit from Return of the Jedi. The rectilinear locomotion that pythons and other snakes use doesn't work underground, as it only affects the belly, not all around the body, so they wouldn't really be able to use that. Amphibians use a type of rectilinear locomotion while burrowing. It's kind of a full body locomotion. And these are worm lizards or limbless lizards, which look like snakes at a glance, but they're not really. They're just like lizards that evolved out their limbs. Some experts say that these are the closest Earth analog to Arax's sandworms.
Well, learn something new every day.
Mm-hmm. But Daniel Goldman, an experimental physicist at Georgia Tech who studies animal movement in various materials, takes issue with this. He says that the speed at which the worms travel just wouldn't work. There are no creatures on Earth that can take off and maintain that kind of speed in a medium with the same amount of friction as sand. You can treat sand like a fluid if something dives into it, but you need to maintain that same speed, and the worms would need to have a very simple body, like, let's say aerodynamic body, maybe a sandodynamic body is a better way to say it.
When you said dives into it, made me think of that segment we did a long time ago with Scrooge McDuck and his money vault.
Oh, yeah, that's
You can't just dive into money. It's hard, and you'll break limbs. And so similarly, a lot of sand, yeah, some is softer than others, but it's usually pretty compact once you go just below the surface.
Yeah, especially if you're not like a knife or something like that.
Correct.
You have a lot of trouble.
Yes, like a toothpick almost, a javelin.
So the sand can be treated as a water-like medium in certain cases where you're very thin, very aerodynamic, and moving very fast. But we don't see those worms diving into the sand. We see them moving fast, but then we don't see them like diving and then coming out, which would need to be what would happen in this case. So if they would stop in the sand, basically starting up again would just be like moving through a brick wall. You stop and you would just be stuck.
Oof.
So worms in the real world, earthworms and some other worms, they move around by eating soil. So they're kind of burrowing through as they do it. And this doesn't seem to be the case for the worms in Dune. They're not like sucking up and expelling sand. And that would be one potential mechanism by which they would move. So they would kind of be like, they'd be like an empty tube that's just like propelling themselves by moving the sand through them.
Now, I remember there was a very mobile earthworm named Jim.
The soil he did crawl.
What do you think about that, Adam?
A super suit did fall.
Oh, he was a suit enhanced. Okay, fair enough.
He had a suit. Well, he doesn't crawl the soil anymore. Once he gets his super suit, he goes around and he says groovy and he shoots people. But
fair enough.
I don't know. I didn't play the game much. I watched the show a bit.
I mean, he also had like a laser gun, so.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. We can find something which moves well in the sand in the realm of very tiny creatures. It's not really the same thing. But nematodes, or roundworms, they're sort of like tiny sandworms. They can live in the desert. They can live in soil or in sand or inside human bodies.
No.
Gross. They're basically one big water balloon-like chamber. They have muscles along their bodies, which makes a slight side-to-side motion to propel them. And this is a bit like how a fish undulates in water. But the scale is so different that it's hard to compare them. There are also sand trouts in Dune, and that's basically just a name they use for smaller worms. They're like the baby worms. We see them in the second movie very briefly. And I don't think they're meant to look any more like fish in the worms, it's just the word they used to describe them. But maybe that was Frank Herbert's way of saying, like, yeah, they swim, they swim like fish. Maybe that's why they call them sand trout. It's also worth considering the sheer weight of sand. Sand is about 60% heavier than water by volume. So the sand pressure of diving in sand, compared to water pressure, sand pressure, would be 60% higher than the equivalent of diving in the same depth of water. I don't know what the gravity on Arrakis is. People appear to move more or less like they're in 1G in the film, but that's probably because they shot the movie on Earth.
Touche, Adam.
I also notice, like, every planet they go to in Star Trek, it always looks like it has Earth-like gravity. It's just because they haven't shot anything on the moon yet.
Well, that's its own kind of historical, quirky, interesting thing, I guess.
Yeah, it's just like you'd have trouble finding a ton of planets with like 1G, but every planet you ever see in Star Wars or Star Trek or most of these.
I mean, you couldn't get Kubrick for everything. It's too expensive.
Well, and he got so much money off of the moon landing videos
exactly
that he doesn't really need to do anything else.
No, just eyes wide shut many decades later.
Oh, yeah.
Round out their oeuvre.
So what about feet, right? Stephen Colbert suggested something like tiny feet to make the move faster. These are not something that can be seen on the official Dune popcorn bucket that was sold at AMC theaters. So you didn't see any little feet on them.
Official popcorn bucket now with authentic tiny feet.
Yeah, so that's sort of like an official way of showing what they look like, and they don't have them. It sort of reminds me of the Ohms in Nusk of the Valley of the Wind. They have these they're these large insect type, they're like almost like beetles with little legs.
Lots of little crawly legs.
And they move around. On the desert and stuff like that. I think Nausicaa was inspired by Dune as well, but I've never seen any.
Well, that's a good point. So, but those little creatures' legs, they're on top of the sand.
They are.
And you're trying to move through sand. Clearly, legs underneath don't work unless it's all like burrowing.
If you had legs for burrowing, you would need like legs all around.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a whole different thing. I don't know how that motion would even work. I don't know of any animal that really does something equivalent to that.
Yeah.
So what about concerns about the size? Okay. Sandworms are 1,300 feet long.
What?
It's close to 400 meters. So in Earth gravity, they would be flattened under their own weight because of their size. An analysis of sandworms in Popular Science presumes that they would use oxygen to survive. I'm not convinced that's how it works. In God Emperor of Dune, it says that they convert heat to oxygen, which is kind of the opposite of what animals do. So I'm not really sure what the biological process with which they get energy is working. Maybe they consume sand as an energy source somehow, but I don't know how that would work.
That would be the loophole, right? There's some sort of extra thing that spice does, because spice does all the things.
Yep. So yeah, they excrete the spice, right? But that would be an explanation. They do some sort of non-biological or non-equivalent to Earth biology power source, right?
Yeah.
So regardless of exactly how they create energy, they would have to do it somehow. The Dune books often mention desert ecology. So Liette Kynes is a planetologist and ecologist who studies this. A man in the book, a woman in the movies. So we don't get specifics of how the ecology on Arrakis works, but by mentioning that it's a real thing and that there's science behind it, we sort of vaguely get the impression that, it was thought of and it kind of makes sense. And that's enough for books usually. It's enough for movies usually. Yeah, unless you're Neil deGrasse Tyson.
That's funny, of course. Never happy. But from what I recall, the book deals a lot with like sort of technical, geographical things, more so than most books.
Yeah, it tries to deal a bit more with like the weather and things like that. But when it really gets into the nuts and bolts of like what's in the desert as far as like living things, it seems like there's not much of it.
No. Yeah, there's nothing there, right? Mm-hmm. Pretty sparse.
So what can we compare these massive worms to? A worm is 400 meters long. The largest animals on Earth are blue whales. They weigh 190 tons and are up to 33.6 meters or 110 feet long. So it's less than 10%, less than a tenth as long as a sandworm in Dune. The reason for which whales are so big is because they're in water. The 10 biggest animals on Earth, they're all types of whales. They're all in the water. They're not above ground, and they're not burrowing in sand, that's for sure. They don't need to support their own weight outside of water like land animals would, so they're able to be bigger. The biggest terrestrial animals on Earth are elephants, with the African bush elephant being 7 meters or 23 feet in length, which is tiny compared to a sandworm. It's less than 2% of the length of a sandworm. So a sandworm is much bigger than the biggest whales, who eat quite a bit.
Yeah, so it's definitely true that the blue whale is the biggest, and it might be the biggest ever for all life on Earth. But as you well know, dinosaurs were pretty big. and some of them were on land. Still not as big as a whale.
Yes.
And it's definitely not as big as a sandworm, of course. But, we did have things larger than the elephant that we currently have. That's all.
So there were some land dinosaurs which were even bigger than modern whales, and I believe there may have been some whale equivalents that were even bigger as well. It's harder to use them as a source of comparison because we don't know as much about them because there are no living specimens today.
True. I mean, and the sandworms are real. Well, the dinosaurs, who knows?
God put those fossils there to test us.
Where are the sandworm fossils, Adam? Where are the sandworm fossils?
I don't even know if they have bones. I don't know. So let's look at what whales eat and try to kind of upscale that to get an idea. There is no single whale, so it varies, but a gray whale eats over 3,000 pounds of food in one day, and some say it could be as much as 4,500 pounds. So we're talking about tons of food every single day. And what are they eating? Well, it varies by size. A baleen whale eats small, manageable prey such as fish, krill, squid, octopus, larvae, small crabs, and other things. Larger whales still eat those smaller things, but they can also eat larger fish, giant squids, octopus, crabs, other whales, dolphins, porpoises, marine animals like seals, sea lions, walruses, and birds and sharks.
So I think the thing is, if you're eating like 4,000 pounds a day, you really just want to make sure you get your macros in.
So there's a lot of food in the ocean, but what's going on in the sands of Dune? It's, for lack of a better term, deserted.
Oh.
It's not a dessert like the one you eat after your supper. There is some life in the desert, as mentioned in the books and as shown in the movie. There's mention of birds, small lizards. We see something that looks like a mouse in one of the films. But the Fremen aren't combing through the sand to catch tons of animals and drain them of their water. And they would if they could, because water is a rare commodity on Arrakis. This is why the Fremen wear still suits, which recycle the body's water as they breathe out and stuff like that, as they sweat. That's why they have this complex equipment to drain dead bodies of their water to reclaim it. If there were a lot of animals available to them, they wouldn't need to do that to dead bodies. Even crying is considered a waste of water on Arrakis. That's how precious even a small amount of water is.
And spitting is a kindness and a gesture, right, of respect.
Yeah, so you're like giving your water to someone. So if the sand was so bountiful that a sandworm, which is 10 times longer than a whale and likely hundreds of times more massive, could consume as little as a few tons of food in a day, then it would be teeming with life. And this is not at all how the desert of Arrakis is portrayed.
You made a good point. I'm not even sure what the Fremen eat.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. And then that becomes a question of if the biology of Arrakis is compatible enough that the Fremen can eat the animals and plants that are native to that planet, then it is probably close enough to Earth biology that we can make more valid comparisons and not have to assume some very different biology.
Like if they eat the worms, that solves one problem.
Well, they don't, but...
No, they don't. But that's a huge, store of calories.
Yeah.
But then, of course, where do the worms get their calories?
Yeah, you're just moving the problem downstream.
Yep.
So in later books, parts of the desert, are talked about being transformed, but water is still said to be a detriment to worms. So the worms are always hanging out in deserted parts of Arrakis, whatever those might be. The worms don't seem to have access to water. Presumably they could get some moisture from animals they kill, but we don't see many animals. In Heretics of Dune, a part that I read after preparing the segment, there's a reference to the worms hold a lot of water, but they don't seem to ingest it. They seem to maybe have some in their body.
These sound like some magical creatures here, Adam.
Absolutely. So there's a bit of a paradox here. If the sandworms are anything like Earth's biological life, they can't be eating or drinking enough, and they must be consuming a lot of energy. There might be some exotic biology at play, but we don't know. They could also just be magic, but that's not outright stated. But it's science fiction. So Dune is a series of science fiction novels. It has some science fiction premises that you kind of assume are the backstory to propel this fiction forward. This includes and is not limited to, what if worms were really big? What if you could ride on those big worms? What if people had evolved through selective breeding to be basically human computers? And what if spaceships could fold space to travel interstellar and intergalactic distances? And what if spice, that's basically worm crap, could allow people to see the future?
A poignant ending. Yes, fundamentally, worms are cool. They're cool in the books, they're cool in the movies. Okay, why not?
Unlike Dune, our world is currently dealing with a lot of AI capabilities and advancements, and I'm going to briefly talk to you about AI assistants.
As we're recording this on Thursday, May 16th, earlier in the week was a pretty big deal. On Monday, OpenAI dropped GPT-4o, or Omni. It's their new flagship model that can reason across audio, vision, and text in real time. So says their press release, or their website. And it's a step towards much more natural human-computer interaction. It accepts as input any combination of text, audio, image, and video, and generates any combination of text, audio, and image outputs. No video generation yet. It can respond to audio inputs in as little as 232 milliseconds with an average of 320 milliseconds, which is similar to a human response time in a conversation. It matches GPT-4 Turbo performance on text in English and code with significant improvement on text in non-English languages, while also being able to be faster and 50% cheaper in the API. It's especially better at vision and audio understanding compared to existing models. They really pushed the openness by making this new product available to everyone. Of course, not quite yet, but in a couple weeks, because OpenAI has been criticized for not being open by how they do things. Like, oh yeah, we're just going to make it available, accessible AI. Well, that's not quite open, but sure, okay.
But it can mean multiple things, but to me, the term OpenAI may be referred to open source. It's not. But
correct.
That's what the original meeting was.
Yes. It was supposed to be far more open with code and how they did things, yes. Mm-hmm. But this GPT-4o score is very high on various benchmarks. And as I said, it's faster, cheaper, all the nice things. That voice, though... As soon as I saw this demo, I thought, that sounds a lot like Scarlett Johansson, who happened, coincidentally, to voice the AI assistant in Her, a great movie by Spike Jonze from many years ago. And I thought it was very feminine, and it seemed very playful, very friendly, which I'm not saying anything, those things are bad, but like, oh, hey, how's it going? That's a nice outfit. What are you doing? Mm-hmm. And The Daily Show did a really good job making fun of this, where they ramped it up, where the host at that time, Desi Lydic, who's female, was saying like, all right, you don't try your flirtatious stuff with me. It's like, what do you mean, right? I'm just a girl who doesn't know things. And then this male co-host pops up. He's like, wait, did I hear about a girl who doesn't know things? It's like, do you want to explain the superhero movies to me? She's like, wait a second, just calm down. This AI knows everything, all the things. It knows how superhero movies work. And then the AI says, well, but for just $19.99, you can tell me who the best Batman is. And then the character's like, where's my money? Where's my credit card? I got to do this. And then, to be fair, because the host was female, then it switched to a male voice like, well, hey, Desi, it can also be a caring boyfriend. You know, those earrings really shape your face well. And I noticed you got your hair cut 1/4 of an inch, which is a large difference. This is just excellent writing. Anyway, I suggest you watch it. The point is, It's a very friendly, some would say almost flirtatious voice, depending on how you read into it. And it was very reminiscent of the movie Her. And Sam Altman tweeted the word her, lowercase h. Mm-hmm. So, of course, this is on people's minds. I'm not necessarily against female voices. Some people made a big stink about this. Whether it's a good or bad thing to have female voices, I think fundamentally people don't like listening to men that much. You could say, well, is it because women are more agreeable? And in this sense, yes, you want to listen to someone who sounds more agreeable if you're asking them to do things. I don't think it's so much bossing people around. It's just like people don't want to listen to men that much in these contexts. That's maybe a segment for another day. All I have to say is that's the big Monday event by OpenAI, which was intentionally held on Monday because on Tuesday, Google had their big I.O. event where they release all their new products, or at least hint at what they're working on. And they dropped Astra, or Project Astra, a universal AI agent that is helpful in everyday life. That's what they describe it as. So Project Astra is not available yet. It will be perhaps sometime later this year. And there was a video demo, which was shot in 2 continuous takes. So one, they have the prototype running on a Google Pixel phone and someone just walking around an office. Mm-hmm. If you see this, I was very impressed. I couldn't help but be very, very impressed. Imagine someone walking through an office and they see a colleague and the colleague is working on some code. And so the person who's holding, I guess, Astra in the phone shows Astra the code on the screen like, oh, what do you think's going on? And it just describes what's actually happening. Yeah. And there's not an equation on the board, but how a flow chart of some type. I didn't understand what even the situation was, and it provided some helpful advice. And it did some other stuff. And then the person who's holding the phone says, hey, do you remember where I put my glasses? And I was like, I think it was near an apple. And you look back and then, oh, there's some glasses near an apple. The phone goes down, the glasses come on, and now you're in an AR glasses experience, which has all the AI stuff again. So Google's like, oh, by the way, AR glasses, Google glasses back in a way, new and improved, so to speak. And it just seemed very seamless and very, very impressive. Both these developments indicate AI assistants are leveling up, have leveled up, and will level up even more and more. So the main purpose of the segment was to highlight that these two recent developments indicate AI assistants are coming along quite nicely if you're talking about capabilities, and of course also risks go along with all that stuff. And I thought just to sort of close it out, I will share some of the content from my book from chapter 9 where I talk about AI assistants. If an AI assistant had access to your entire web browsing history, as well as your location, purchases, time spent on other apps, and everything else, it would be better able to deliver goods and services that you want. Of course, this comes at a loss of privacy and perhaps a greater vulnerability to invasive advertisements. Now, this came out last November. Capabilities will get even more impressive, but also even more concerning with AI assistants becoming multimodal, accepting not just text as input, but also images, sound, and video to better assist you with whatever your goals happen to be. This way, your AI assistant will be able to see what you see to offer better guidance and help. This is exactly what they're showing us in this video, right?
Nailed it, Darren.
Yes, I saw the present. It's very impressive. Advanced AI assistants may replace personal assistants for white-collar jobs. An average human-level AI assistant could be a personalized work partner that learns from each and every job you do, is always improving, and knows you better than anyone else. Yeah. An AI work assistant could learn your bad work habits and help prevent them from happening. If you tend to put off replying to emails, it could prompt you for minimal guidance and do it for you. It could maximize your ability to focus on particular tasks by blocking distracting apps. This technology could also very easily become the norm, to the point that if you don't have a personal AI assistant that responds to trivial emails, book meetings, and produces work reports, you'll be less employable than someone who does. In addition to typical work and life administration tasks, there will be strong incentives to use AI chatbots as therapists, life coaches, and mentors for several reasons. First, an AI therapist can be available to you any day of the week, any hour of the day. Second, the AI models will be much cheaper, perhaps 1,000 times cheaper, than human therapists or counselors. Third, super intelligent therapists could perform as well as or better than an expert therapist. The AI models could sample across all techniques that work the best and provide targeted therapy that would surpass the effectiveness of most practitioners. Highly personalized treatment by an intelligent helper is very desirable, especially if it can adapt to your particular communication style and preferences to optimize results. Fourth, many people are willing to say things to an AI system that they are not willing to say to a person. They might feel embarrassed, ashamed, or just shy to talk about deeply personal thoughts and feelings and desires. In this way, the human user gets more effective therapy because they are a more forthcoming client. Perhaps you've come to realize that it would be useful for you to hear, "You're doing a good job. Just keep going," 30 times a day. You would never ask a friend for such validation. Even asking once feels prohibitively awkward. With an AI assistant, that barrier drops to near zero quite quickly. Even if not all of these conditions are met, it is still very reasonable to expect AI therapists to proliferate. This is because an AI therapist that is only 80% as good as a person becomes very appealing if it only costs $1 an hour instead of a couple hundred, or free with GPT-4 or Omni. A similar logic could apply to medical, financial, or legal advice. What could be better than someone who helps you with your work, your life, and your mental well-being? What about a good friend or romantic partner who can also do all those things? An artificial superintelligent companion could remember all the things we tell it and repackage them at optimal times so that we feel heard, so that we feel understood. It wouldn't yell at us or say anything deeply hurtful. Over time, it would also come to know our exact sense of humor and be able to talk with us in depth about all of our favorite topics. Perhaps most importantly, its responses would make each of us feel validated, heard, and understood, which would convince us it liked us. A conversational partner who challenges you in exactly the right way to maximize your intellectual, emotional, and spiritual development would be highly desirable to many millions of people. On the other hand, consistently interacting with a companion who is a mix of servant, employee, and slave could be bad for you and bad for the world. We do not need to imagine what diverse emotional experiences and complications might arise with AI romantic companions because it is already happening. So ends Darren's reading of his own book, which, if you haven't had a chance, it's on Amazon. And please leave a review on Amazon too.
It's an audio version.
I heard it
sounds like that.
That sounds a lot like that. We should just splice that in. But more practically, these recent developments, even though I wrote the book, it makes it more tangible to imagine near-term futures. I was just saying to Adam, like if you happen to have a young person in your life, whether perhaps it's your own child or a relative who's under the age of 10, it is not implausible to think that their first romantic relationship, perhaps real attachment from their point of view, will be an artificial intelligence system as opposed to a human. And are we ready for this as a society? I don't think we are.
So frightening. to be
It
honest.
is a little bit frightening. Correct. I mean, you could see like, well, maybe in some ways it's better, but in some ways it could be very worse, right?
I'm reminded of something that a friend of ours once said about they were listening to audiobooks at like 2 times speed, but then they found conversations with normal people boring, so they stopped. I think that's a concern, right? If the simulation of a person, for lack of a better term, and it's a simulated role of a friend or romantic partner or whatever, is so good that it makes you impatient or intolerant towards the normal day-to-day interactions with normal people. You're not as attentive or whatever it is as my AI buddy. That could be a problem. So we'll have to navigate that kind of challenge, right? And as we see, the problem with today's technology is the kind of super stimulus aspect of it is that it
Totally.
it hijacks our attention.
Yeah. Unless we create a society where you never have to talk to people. It's always AI. See Futurama, Why Humans Shouldn't Date Robots, propaganda film from back in the day.
So they have their own version of the Butlerian Jihad where they
Exactly.
want to have romance with robots.
It's so well done, right? Hey, do you want to come over to my house and make out? That's all the way across the street. I have my Marilyn Monroe robot right here. Yeah, it's concerning. We should have more people thinking about it. Well, thank you for joining us once again, listeners. Adam explored the science of the worms in Dune, and it seems like they just can't exist, at least as far as we understand how physics works. And I talked to you a bit about AI assistants, how they're rapidly increasing in capabilities, and they'll be coming to you very soon if they haven't already. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Outtakes.
Do I want to make a stupid segue?
I'm just doing a CrossFit gym. That's all people do all day. It's a good job. Good job.
That's funny. 3 paragraphs left.
Peace out, cuboids. I was going to do it in a sexy voice. Should I try it in a sexy voice?
Why not?
Okay. Is that sexy?
Oh, you, Adam.
That's fine.